Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Robbie Astral, and welcome to Robbie Tech. Today we're going to be showing you a quick and simple and easy way on how to create yourself a high performance portable SSD. We've got a couple of products that you're going to require, and by all means utilize any of these that you have lying about. More so importantly, the SSD itself. I actually had a couple that came out of the PC. They were only 250 gigabyte drives. As boot drives weren't sufficient, so I replaced those and now have them lying about. So I've already got one of these SSDs in a Simplecom SSD enclosure. The Simplecom SSD enclosures are very cheap on a comparison level to what is available. You can pick these enclosures up for approximately $40 to $50 Australian. It's a simple and effective means of housing your spare SSDs, your M.2 to be specific SSDs. This is an M.2 enclosure, and let's get into how easy it is to make yourself one. If you were to buy one of these already made for yourself, for example, there's a ROG Strix edition where you can buy the enclosure by itself. I would wisely consider doing so and buying that enclosure by yourself if you're after a bit more of a premium model. The markup on the pre-made ones can be up to $200. It's a fair chunk for just ultimately unscrewing a couple of screws and slotting it in. Bob's your uncle, it's done. So the first thing you're going to need is an SSD that you can utilize and put in the enclosure. I'm using a 970 Evo Plus 250 gigabyte model. The second thing you're going to require is your enclosure. In my case, I've got myself a Simplecom model enclosure. There are varying brands and varying enclosures from each brand as well. I would suggest getting yourself, especially if you plan to transfer large amounts of files at a time, an enclosure that definitely has a heat spreader on it or some form of cooling capability, so that, in my case for example, the 970s get quite hot and they can throttle. As soon as they throttle, you lose all that speed and performance that's available to the NVMe itself. So you have to make sure that they maintain a set temperature that's below their throttling range. That way you will have your high performance drive running optimally every time you use it. So with that said, we have our 970 Evo Plus ready to rock and roll with. As you can see, an M.2 specific drive does have a little groove in it. Older drives tend to have two grooves. You have to make sure that you're utilizing an M.2 specific drive if you have an M.2 specific SSD enclosure. We'll open up the Simplecom closure pack that I've got ready to roll with. These aren't dear, gives you the luxury of actually getting a high performance drive El Cheapo. Just understand that, make sure enclosure you're using is definitely a valid heat spreader at the very least, such as this one, or has some component that is a heat spreader that's slightly larger perhaps, especially regarding how you plan to utilize that drive. So in the box we've got the enclosure. You also come with a little screwdriver that you'll require, also a user manual, a thank you card from Simplecom in this case, and all the screws that you're going to require to connect the device and install the device. With that in mind, you also get a 3.1 Gen 2 USB connection that also has a compatible USB-C adapter to it. With this connected, you can in theory get 10 gigabits a second transfer rates. Unfortunately though, the transfer rates, the read and write speeds will be dependent on your drive's capability. So keeping that in mind, I'm using a Gen 3 drive. You could potentially be using a Gen 4 drive with a higher speed and performance capacity. So just to show you how easy it is, I'm going to now unscrew the two screws which are in the grooves here. So we have our two screws unscrewed. They're a little fiddly, So I just jumped ahead because just pay attention, you may lose them quite easily. Then once done, in my case, the panel itself does not come out very easily. So you just grab the provided screwdriver, pop it in one of the holes and just pull back a little bit and it should fall out. Once in this position, pop your hand on the table. Be careful because it is circuitry after all. It's a small circuit board and it will just easily come out like so. The screw that you'll need to connect the NVMe to the board itself is already provided as well. And as you can see, in this case, the Simplecom board acts as a heat spreader. On both sides, you've got copper laid out to provide cooling capabilities, as well as the enclosure itself, which is made out of aluminium and allows for the connection of the device to be able to, as it heats up, cool itself continuously. Once in this position, all you have to do is grab your SSD and make sure that the tooth where the groove is lines up with the little latch on the connection point on the circuitry board that you plan to put back in the enclosure for the SSD itself. Very simple. Slot it in as so. Just like with many connections for SSDs, it will be a little floppy, and that means you've got it correctly. What you're going to have to do then is basically just screw it down in. Some enclosures will have standoffs, something to consider. You may require a standoff as well before you screw it in. This enclosure already comes with a small standoff that's designed for the enclosure itself, and all you need to do is utilize the screw provided and fasten it in place. To fasten it in place, I would suggest magnetizing the screwdriver itself so that it's a little more forgiving. Push down on the NVMe, pop the screw in place and screw it in. Once done here, make sure you noted in which way you removed the SSD enclosure from the case and just line it up per se. So in my case, there are 2 grooves, bottom side for the board itself and the top side which allows for you to fit the NVMe in place. Line it up, push it in, and you're almost in the home straight. So in my case, the little panel latch has an additional hole in it. Just make sure that it lines up in the way that you removed it. So in my case, along with the logo, that little hole, not the screw hole, but there's another little hole there, was top side. So make a note of things like this while you're doing it so that you have no problems in the short to long term regarding your utilization of your NVMe SSD portable storage device. So once that's in, grab the 2 screws originally that you had there and simply screw them into place. So once you've got the screw in, it may be a little bit fiddly. Just take your time, you should be fine. Make sure you're doing it over a table as the screws are very small and you may lose them. And just screw it in. Not too tight. Don't wreck the thread. Now for the next one, get it in the thread. Make sure you're lined up and screw it in. Okay, with that said, we've got ourselves now 2 NVMe SSDs. Remember M.2 mark regarding additional performance as well as the older model variants of the NVMe's, which aren't M.2, tend to be of an older generation. So you won't gain those same performance gains from them. But now portable SSDs that allow us for higher performance, in turn quicker transfers of our files between computers. Just remember the limitations of your computers as well, as the USB ports that you utilize must be for those higher speeds, at least of generation 3.1, It's not to say that these NVMe's aren't backwards compatible, but remember that that will lower the performance available regarding these. And also just remember one other thing, that when you are disconnecting the device, make sure you do so in the bottom right corner where the device is active. There's a little icon there, right click on it and just disconnect device, so it's safely done so and it minimizes the chance of any loss of data. On a side note, if you don't have any spare NVMe's lying about, or you're not in a position to buy any, remember the enclosures range from $20 to $100 plus, so you can get yourself a cheap enclosure. But an alternative that you may consider is you might in fact have some standard SSDs lying about. So in my case, I had a spare 860 Evo, which is 500 gigabytes. For additional storage capacity, you may be able to pick yourself up an SSD, a standard one with a higher capacity that costs the same amount as a 250 gig NVMe may cost these days. Enclosures for these standard SSDs are also readily available. In my case, I've got another Simplecom enclosure that's ready to rock and roll with. I plan to put that spare SSD in it as well. For my purpose, I got it because it matches the other enclosures I've already purchased for the NVMe's, and they have a nice brushed aluminium finish with an accent on the side, and that seems to suit all my gunmetal peripherals and whatnot quite adequately, so I'm happy about that. Just understand that the performance and the read and write speeds, the transfer speeds will vary on the SSDs themselves. They can only manage approximately up to 600 megabits a second, as opposed to 3,500 megabits a second. But regarding that, if you don't have those Gen 3.1 ports and whatnot, and you've got 3.0 or below, then this is a great alternative for you to have maximum speed transfer and also have a portable device. Okay guys, I'm going to keep that short and sweet. I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, please hit the like button, please subscribe and or follow. We do have a sister site on Facebook. We've just started a PC hardware and builds group page on Facebook where everyone's willing to lend a hand if you need to know something about any specific piece of hardware and or for your next build, whether it's compatible, along with PC news, tech memes, as well as any funny videos and whatnot which are tech related. So everyone's welcome to join. And again, I appreciate all the support. And from Robbie Astral at Robbi Tech, signing out.